Hi everyone, this is Tuplex. Welcome back. Today we're going to continue our discussion of trains and rail systems. In the part 1 video, I talked about how to set up a rail system using single tracks running in both directions with two-headed trains. So today I wanted to show you an example of something that would be suitable for higher levels of traffic. In this case, using a two-rail system. So we're back on my Rail World Marathon map. So as you can see, I have a pretty large train system here. Most of it is using two rails. And the way that two rails are set up normally is you would have, in my case, the right-hand track going forward and the left-hand track in the opposing direction. So this is what you would call a right-hand drive system as opposed to left-hand drive, because you drive on the right side track. And the way this is set up is one track with a space of two tracks in between and then the next track. And the reason for that spacing, as opposed to something closer like this, or like this, the reason for that spacing is number one, so that you can run power poles down the middle. Obviously, you don't need all that space for the power poles, but having a space of two also allows you to make turns and crossings and have enough room to put all your signals in. Okay. So in a setup like this, you would normally, like I said, run a power pole down the middle. Sometimes you would have lights as well. It's up to you. And then every so often, you would have a set of signals. Now, in this case, you would only have signals on one side of the track, since you want the tracks to be one way. And the reason that you put those signals every so often is so that you can have multiple tracks traveling in the same direction on the same rail. Now, if you didn't have signals spaced throughout this rail, then anytime there's a train on this rail, no other trains will be able to use it until it's clear. So you space these signals out periodically so that you can break up the segment into smaller blocks, and that'll allow multiple trains to get on the same piece of rail traveling in the same direction. Okay. Now, once you get into junctions, in this case, this is a T-Junction. Things get a little more complicated, obviously, with this sort of setup with the signaling. Because in this case, each track needs to branch off. So, for example, in the northbound track here, you have a segment that's going straight, and then you have a segment that's turning left into this other direction. And then from that direction, you also have a rail that is merging onto this northbound track. And then for the southbound track, it's a similar situation. So each track needs to be able to go in two different directions, as well as receive traffic from two different directions. So in the case of the southbound, you can see it splits here to go left or go straight. And then there's also a merge here on the other side. So the signaling here gets a little bit complicated, but it still follows all the basic rules that I discussed in the last video. So for example, we can see here on the northbound track, let's look at our exits, right? So I have a split here. We don't care too much about splits, right? Because splits are easy. You don't actually need signals on splits. In this case, we have them for a couple reasons. Now here's the tricky part. This is where we have a merge, and on the exit of that merge, we have a regular signal. So remember, we said that at a junction exit, you want a regular signal. And then before that, we have a chain signal. So that way, if there's a train coming, let's say a train's coming this way, and the block ahead is occupied, we'll have a red signal there. We don't want that train to go all the way up here, because then if there's a train waiting to turn left, it's not going to be able to get into the junction. So that way we'll have the train waiting back here. And then also here, we wouldn't want, well, actually, this chain signal is probably not even necessary, to be completely honest with you. Since it's traveling this way, we can remove that. Okay, so a train coming in this direction would either stop here if the way ahead was blocked, or it would stop here. Okay, and we have a chain signal here. This chain signal is associated with this regular signal way over here. Okay, so traveling in this direction, that way if it's blocked up here, it's not going to block this path, it's not going to block this path, and it's not going to block this path because it'll stop way back here at this chain signal. Okay, so that's just this rail going in this direction. And then this rail merging onto this one. So again, we have our regular signal at the exit. There's a chain signal here, so that if it's red, it'll stop here and not block the junction for trains traveling in this direction. There's another chain signal back here, so that if the train is here when it goes red, it won't block this crossing either, or this crossing. Right, so when this one goes red, both of these chain signals will turn red to protect these intersections. And the reason we have multiple chain signals is because, you know, if a train gets over here and then it goes red, it'll have another chance to stop and not block this rail. If the train is back here when it goes red, then it's going to stop right here. Okay, so you could follow that same logic for all the other intersections through this junction, but that's a T-junction on a two-way system. Okay, so in this case, I have an outpost for oil. My train is currently blocking the path, but so in this case, when a train comes in, it'll come over this way, and then I have a very simple loop here for the outpost. The train will come up here. Once it's done emptying, it'll loop around and go back in the other direction. On this map, all my trains are single-headed, so they can only travel in one direction, and because of that, every outlet needs a loop so that the train can turn around and go back. Right? So in this case, either from this direction or from this direction, it could come here. It'll go around, turn around, and then either turn left or turn right, depending on where the train needs to go next. All right, so let's open up the map and look at a few other situations. So here I have a little supply drop-off for the wall. And here I just have a very simple U-turn. So the trains come up here, it turns around, stops at the station, and continues on its way. Now, in some cases, I have, like at this copper outpost, for example, here, instead of using a two-way T-junction, I have an exit and I have an entrance. So these are like one-way exits and entrances from a two-way system. So in other words, to get to this copper outpost, the trains will only come in one way here. And so it's essentially a T-junction that's been split and spread apart, in so many words. And I use that at a lot of my outposts. Like you can see here, these are one-way. This is a one-way exit from the main line to get to the outpost, and then I have a one-way entrance to get back onto the main line. This is another example of a very simple station with a one-way entrance and a one-way exit, as opposed to a regular T-junction. All right, and then here at this oil depot, this is an example where I did use a regular T-junction, and then I split the track as it got closer to the junction. I don't have any crossings on this map. I tried to make everything with T-junctions just to avoid traffic backups. But let me see if I can find an example of a... Yeah, this would be an example of a four-way crossing. Now in this case, it uses a roundabout rather than a crisscross. So this also provides the opportunity to make U-turns. You could turn left, you could turn right. To go straight, you would actually have to go around the circle. This type of setup, at least for smaller trains, will often allow for faster traffic. You know, the other option would be just to have, let's see, 1, 2. The other option would be to have a crossing like this. That works too. It requires a lot more signals, but you can set it up like that too. And then you'll notice as well that I have blueprints for all this stuff. You know, once you get to multi-lane tracks, you really want to be using blueprints to set this up. It would be very time-consuming to lay all these rails by hand. So normally what I would do, at least to get started, is I would lay out some track, you know, for the basic element of the track. I would put in a power pole and then another power pole. I would set up my signals where those power poles are. Is that on the right side? Yeah, that's the right side. And then this would go there, that would go there. Okay, and then you can eliminate those two pieces, and then we can eliminate those pieces. Right, and then this would serve as the basic blueprint for laying out track. And then I can just run along like this, you know, and using my bots, I can fairly quickly run large sections of track along with the signals, everything spaced out nicely. And then, you know, you can rotate that vertically if you wanted to make it go vertical. So I have a blueprint book where I have straight sections like that. I have T-junctions and all those things in a blueprint book. And if you go to factorioprints.com, you'll be able to find lots of good blueprints available there for different train systems. You know, with 2 rails, I've got one here that is 4 lanes. This is a blueprint book that Mojo put together. Obviously, you can see that once you get to 4 lanes, you know, the intersections get even more complicated with lots and lots of signals. But if you want to run lots and lots of trains, you need to scale up like that. And actually, on this map, I do have one section of track where I have a lot of traffic. That one I did upgrade to 4 lanes. And it's just to allow extra traffic to go through so that if your main 2 lanes get crowded, the train has the ability to go off onto a second lane going in the same direction, so you can handle more trains. I did that there because I was getting, you know, some of my entrances and exits off of this section were getting blocked because there was so much traffic going through. So, I mean, you can even see here it's slowing down a bit. That helped a lot with traffic. And then here's an example of a T-junction. This is like a 4-to-2 T-junction. And you can see there's lots of little, you know, turns merging together, lots of signals. It would have taken me a long time to try to build that myself, which is why I just found some good blueprints that I know already work, and I use those. So as networks get bigger, and as you start putting together train stations that are going to have multiple trains coming in, you might want to start looking at doing a stacker, which is what this is called. So what this is for is that when you have, you know, 1 or several train stations and you have more trains coming in than you have open stations available, you need to have a place for the trains to wait so that they're not blocking your main line. So you want them to get off of the main line, and this is basically just a waiting area, and the trains will sit here and wait for one of the stations to open up. So the way this works, and I'm sorry you can't see this bottom rail. Let me see if I can find one. Yeah, here you can see the whole thing. So the way this works is the trains will come up. They'll take whichever lane is available. Going into each lane, there's a signal. So that way, when a train comes in, if there's a red signal because it's occupied, it'll just take the next closest green one. And then up here, I have chain signals. And I have chain signals here because I don't want the trains to leave and block all these junctions until it's got a clear path all the way to one of the stations. Okay, so if we look at our blocks, you'll see that between the stacker and the individual outlets where I have the stations, that's all one block. So until one of these stations is clear, none of these trains will leave the stacker. And that just helps to make sure that, because if one of these trains starts to leave and then it has to stop for some reason, then none of the other trains will be able to get to their stations while it's waiting. So so that's a way to keep the trains from getting in each other's way. And then again here, this is, once we leave the main line, this whole thing is one way. So the trains will exit here, they go into the stacker. Once the station is clear, they travel one way, and then when they're ready to go, there's an exit on the other side, and that comes down and puts them back on the main line. So again, with when you're using single-headed trains, everything has to have a loop. So you need an in and an out for every station. That does require you to build more rail, but it also results in a very smooth traffic pattern in most cases. I think that's about all I wanted to show you here. I do have another map where I have an example of 2-lane rails where I use double-headed trains. So I'm going to load up that map and I'll show that to you as well. I'll be right back. All right, and I'm back. Now this is a map where I have, as you can see here, I have 2-headed trains. So when you have a 2-headed train, obviously you can end the track where your station is. But in this case, I am using a 2-lane rail system so that I can get more traffic. Unfortunately, I get in on the tail end of this train instead of the front, which is a little disorienting. But so as we go back to the station here, you'll see that we're on this 2-way segment, where we've got 1 lane in each direction. So we use the T-junctions and so on like we normally do. The signaling is set up the same way as it would be with single-headed trains. But once you get to the station, which you'll see here in a minute, the 2 lanes will merge into a single 2-lane track. Okay, and I'm going to exit here real quick. All right, so you can see here I've got multiple stations, but since the stations are, these spurs that just end where the station is, in that case, the 2 lanes will merge into one, and then it'll exit out the other lane, like it did just then. And so signaling-wise, it's fairly easy to handle. You have a signal in each direction on the 2-lane portion, and then you merge them together, and at that point you need to use a signal on each side of the track, since you want that to be a 2-way track, right? And the other stations are set up that way as well. So this is a way that you can use 2-headed trains along with a multi-lane rail system. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, the nice thing about this is that you don't have to have loops. And so you can pack in a lot of stations fairly close together. You don't have to worry about having a return loop at every outpost. So it makes it a little bit easier to set up your stations. You can pack them in fairly tightly. Back at the main base here on this map, I can get the train stations fairly close to where the rest of the action is because I don't need return lanes for these trains. So it's a little bit easier, I guess, to set up the base. Some people really don't like using 2-headed trains. One of the issues, like you'll see with my supply train here, every time the train comes back, the opposite end is facing in. So it's hard to set up your cars if you have multiple items in your cars. It's hard to get those type of setups to work well. But when you have a case where you have, the same item in all the cars on a train, I think it works pretty well. And I wanted to try it. That's why in this map, this is a multiplayer map that I'm doing with my brother. That's why we set it up this way on this map. But the two-way or the multi-lane portion of the track is the same as what I just showed you on the other map. It's only when you get towards the stations that you merge, and then you just go to signals on each side of the track. And then where the station is, you can just end the track right there, and it'll reverse out and go along its way. So it's definitely doable. In the case that you have a stacker, you do have to keep the stacker one way and then loop it around. So where you have stackers, you almost have to treat that. You almost have to treat that like a single-headed sort of a setup. I mean, I suppose you could back out and then you could have your return lane over here, but I found it easier just to treat that like a one-way sort of a setup. Yeah, and I think that's about all I have to say about trains. If you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to do what I can to answer those questions for you. If you have any suggestions for other tutorials you'd like me to make, please let me know that as well. I am planning to do one more on nuclear power. Those are all the tutorials that I have planned for the moment. So again, if you want to see something else, let me know and I'll try to accommodate that. Thanks again for watching. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. Please subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.